All right, so once you've finalized your first set of blocking poses in Maya, so we did this in the last video or the last class, we established what those key extreme poses are, and now we want to identify our second set of blocking poses so we can get those in before we do any sort of in-betweens or final character animation, or before we start cleaning it up. So let's go ahead and start to identify where those in-between poses are. And at this point, once we've established those key poses or those extremes, it becomes a little easier because it's more or less the frame in between our blocking poses here on the first pass. So, for example, we started here on frame 0. That was our first pose. Our second pose was frame 15. So if I'm thinking about my second set of blocking passes, it should be somewhere between frame 0 and 15. So it's probably going to be somewhere around frame 7 or 8. Now, this is a little easier to do if you have some type of performance where your character is either doing a walk or a run and jump, because we could really use the passing position as your in-between frame. So with Lauren here, I don't really have a pass except for, excuse me, somewhere right around in here on frame 70. This is probably about the only pass on this. So this one's going to be a little different, but if you had something that is maybe a little more comparable to this, where we do have contact to contact type positions here, those in-between poses are going to be, or those in-between frames are going to be pretty easy to identify. So let me find a contact here. So this would be a contact on frame 19, so that forward leading leg, that heel, is the first thing that touches the ground, and this would be a contact pose. The next pose would be probably frame 29. So again, between, what did I say, 19 and 29, these would be poses for my first set of blocking poses. These would be my first extremes. And then I would want to find, for my second set of blocking poses, the in-between frame between 19 and 29. So that would probably be somewhere right around there, frame 25. So again, I would identify what that passing position would be. We're looking at the leg that is getting ready to swing forward into that next contact, and so that right leg is the one that's leading forward or moving forward, and it passes right there around frame 25. So this would be my frame 25 would be my secondary, or my second set of passing positions or poses. So again, it's a little easier when you have something like this. With Lauren, it's going to be a little more difficult just because we don't have actual contacts, or I'm sorry, passing positions. So at this point, I'm just going to kind of look at the frames that we're going in between. In most cases, it's just going to be the middle frame. So, with this, it's probably just going to be frame 7. But I am going to look at the action and the movement in the body to see if there are sort of extremes between, let's say, 0 and 15, to see if there might be an ideal situation or pose in between that might work better than the actual middle frame. So before I start identifying these, let's just go ahead and put these in our text document here. So I'm going to do second blocking poses. And I just want to reiterate, this isn't optional. You should definitely have a blocking pass 1 and a blocking pass 2. You should definitely be using your reference with a time code and picking out the actual frames. I've already seen 1 or 2 of these where we were just kind of guessing. I don't want any guesswork in this. When we're doing something more complex than a basic walk cycle, if we're doing some type of complex character animation or performance, we should definitely be using reference, at least for timing. I don't care if you deviate from the poses if it leads to a stronger performance, but again, for timing, we should definitely be adhering to this. So let's take a look here. So we're going between our first set of blocking poses. So my first pose was on 0 and my second pose was on 15. We should be aiming for somewhere between these two. So let's see, probably around frame 7. And I would say that's about right. So I'm just going to use the directional arrows on my keyboard to go between 0 and 15. And there's not a whole lot going on. I don't have a drastic change in movement. So most of this becomes kind of preparing for the throw. So Lauren's kind of preparing herself and anticipating this throw. So really, I'm just going to choose sort of the in-between frame. So we're going to go for frame 7 here. And I'm going to record that, and then let's go to the next set of poses. So the next set is going to be between frame 15 and 30. So it probably, if I had to guess, it's going to be somewhere around frame 22. But again, let's take a look and see what's actually happening here between frames 15 and 30. So with this particular pose, I planned ahead a little bit. And so your extremes are technically 15 to 38, because we're going from this pose to the next extreme pose back here. And I already kind of planned in an in-between, which was this pose here on 30, where we're halfway between that motion or those extremes. But so at this point, I am going to just kind of pick a frame that's between, so probably around frame 22. And so we'll go ahead, we'll call it 22. The next set we have is frames 30 and 38. So if I had to guess, I'm going to say it's going to be frame 34, but let's again just take a look and see what's happening. So again, there's that pose on 30, and then we go to 38. And I'm going to look at what's happening through Lauren's body, or our subject's body here, just to see if there's any major changes in the feet position. The feet stay mostly in the same position the whole time. If I did have sort of a drastic movement, I would maybe want to consider that. But I think I'm just going to pick frame 34, so just something in between here. We do get a little bit of movement here, so the torso or the waist is coming down, that left leg is bending forward more, but the foot is staying planted. But overall, nothing major, so I'm going to go ahead and we'll call this frame 34. The next set is between frames 38 and 43. So there's not a whole lot of difference between this. We only have 5 frames here that we're talking about between 38 and 43. But let's see what's happening. So that's the extreme where Lauren's arm is the furthest back it goes here for the pitch. And then frame 43 is that sort of vertical placement of that arm. And so I'm just going to pick one. Not a whole lot of drastic change here. So let's just go forward 2 or 3 frames. I'm going to call it frame. I'm probably going to do frame 40. Mostly because if we look at the footing position here, Lauren's left leg, the foot, if we kind of look at that, it's coming up on that ball, or the ball of the foot. And I think it mostly stops moving there at around frame 40. So let's go ahead and make frame 40 our next pose. And then, let's see, where are we at? 43 and 48. So we're going to be somewhere between that. So let's go ahead and find out what's going on between 43 and 48. So this is where we do start to get a drastic change or shift in weight in the positioning of the feet. So here on 43, if we watch Lauren's right leg, it's actually pointed towards the audience. And then as we go through here to pose on 48, that foot swings around. So let's see here. Let's And there's only a few frames between this. So again, we're in another situation where there's only really 5 frames. I'm going to do frame 46, right when that foot is mostly twisted around here. And then let's see, the next set. So this is where we get into single frames. So we have one keyframe on 48, and then the next extreme is on 50. So there's really only a frame difference between the two. Now, if you get in a situation like this, I'm going to leave it up to you. So you'll be animating on single frames here for 3 frames. We could do it. It's not going to hurt anything if we include it, but it's just 1 frame, so I'm going to skip it. So I'm actually not going to do another pose there. Yeah, so I'm going to skip that. Yeah, I've seen animators actually animate on single frames the entire time. It gets kind of crazy, and it's not a graph editor I'd want to clean up, but let's see, what's next? So if we're going to skip that one, the next set here, we're going to go between frames 50 and 62. So that's a difference of 12 frames there, but let's see what's happening here. So at frame 50, this is an extreme here where Lauren's arm is the furthest forward. So we're projecting that ball. And then what happens here? And it looks like the momentum here shifts, and we're swinging that arm all the way around, and then the foot is sliding across into sort of that contact position, or what I deemed a contact position there, because it kind of hangs for a moment there on 62. So let's see if there. We'll just go forward 6 frames here and see what we've got. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so we'll just do the in between there. So we'll call it 56. The next set here we have 62 and 75. I think this is where we get an actual pass. So at this point, I am going to look for that moment when it looks like this leg could be passing the other. Now, the way her body is kind of rotated, it's not quite a pass, but it's pretty close. So, I'm going to say it's probably somewhere around frame 70. So I'm going to key that in as my pass. And then the next set of keys here we have is 75 and 86. So on 75 we have a contact. So again, contact is usually the initial point in which the leg that's coming forward touches the ground. In most cases, again, that contact is usually on the heel, but in this case it looks like Lauren is touching there on the toe tip. And then let's see what happens after that contact. Kind of settle the weight in there, and then that other foot comes up on the toe. So I think I'm going to look for a pose in which that toe on the left foot is mostly up. And we still kind of want to aim between the two. So I'm going to maybe do frame 83. And that's it. Now, with this, ideally, so again, with this particular reference, there's no sort of final resting pose. So I feel like with this, we would maybe need to make up at least one additional pose after this to get more of a neutral, relaxed position with this character so we don't get an abrupt ending. So if you did have to kind of make up some animation at the end, you'll want to go between those frames. So I think with this particular animation, I think up here I would maybe have the left foot come into a resting position here in front of Lauren, and this one would probably take about 10 frames for that to happen. So I would probably have this at 96, and then I would go between those two, and so we would have something around. I know I'd maybe make this 91 or something like that. So do keep that in mind. If you had to make up maybe a little bit extra at the end, you'll still want to set up secondary poses for that. But at this point, I've got my secondary passes figured out, and I would want to go into my blocking and start implementing these. So I would go to frame 7 and in my footage and in Maya and start setting up those poses to match with my reference. And you should still be in stepped, so you should not have any in-betweens on your character at this point. So again, we are still in stepped, and your character will be snapping into position. So we're holding our poses until the next pose. So again, make sure you have absolutely no in-betweens as you're setting this up. I am going to stop here, and the rest of today will be workday. Your second set, or your second stage of blocking passes, will be due on Monday. Now, if you're done now, or if you get done early, don't wait. You can go ahead and start finishing or cleaning up your animation. So after your second set of blocking poses, you'll want to flatten your tangents and then start cleaning up the animation or the character's performance. If you do want me to look at your poses before you actually get into cleaning up your animation, I'm more than happy to look at that. So again, if you do finish that before the end of class, you can have me look at your poses just to make sure they look good, and then you can start cleaning up your character's animation with in-betweens. And then, over the weekend, I wouldn't wait. If you've got time and you finished your second blocking pass and you'd like me to look at your poses, don't hesitate to email me. I'm more than happy to look at your poses. So if you want my feedback before you do start cleaning up your animation, please send it to me. I'm trying to think of what else. I guess we could talk about the final a little bit more. So your final is due 2 weeks from today. So you've got 2 weeks to finish your animation on your character, do simulation, and render. All week next week will be work week. Our last official meeting day for class is December 10th. So let me pull this up here. December 10th is our last meeting day. We're going to use that day as sort of a progress critique on your animation. At that point, your character animation should be done. Your simulation should hopefully be mostly done or figured out. And so we're going to spend that time to look at your work and get you a mid-progress critique. You won't have to have anything rendered at that point, but your final will be due Friday, the 14th by noon. So you'll have that submitted. It needs to be rendered, composited, rendered in Maya, composited in After Effects, and you're only going to turn in the final rendered video from After Effects. I don't need your scene folder or anything like that. I just want your final rendered video. In terms of your render passes, we're going to tone this back from what we've done in the previous classes because we're focusing on the animation in this class. We're not really focusing as much on the rendering. I'm only going to require a straight beauty pass and an ambient occlusion pass, and that's it. So the setup for that should be pretty straightforward. We will, at the end of next week, it'll probably be a 10-minute video of me just quickly showing you or refreshing your memory in terms of setting up the AOVs and rendering out of Maya. So hopefully that'll be relatively quick. But yeah, does anybody have questions about what's expected for the final? No? Okay. I'll stop here. Rest of today will be work day, and I'll start taking questions here in just a minute once I get the video up.